Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that is very important to me, which is hearing, and how sensitive hearing is, and how sounds can, even at a very small volume, be heard by people if they put in the extra effort. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start us off with a little bit of a test. So I'm going to start whispering and then get louder and louder, and you guys tell me when you can start hearing me. So again, I'm going to be talking very quietly, so just try and listen in. Raise your hand if you can hear me. Ah! That was a joke. We're actually not talking about hearing today. We're talking about the effectiveness of horror movies and having a positive impact on your life. So I want to start you guys off a little bit of a jolt, a little bit of a scare to get you in the right frame of mind for what we're going to be talking about today. So what we're going to discuss is both a little bit of the physical benefits of watching a horror film and many of the psychological benefits of watching a horror film. So first with the physical, the primary way in which watching a horror film has a positive impact on you is simply by burning calories. When you watch a horror film, it raises your heart rate, it causes your blood to move faster through your veins, it raises your blood pressure. All these things work together. You get a little bit of sweat on your brow as you're watching a film if you're really into it and you're scared. What all this does is it works to burn calories. There was actually a study that was done by the University of Westminster in the United Kingdom. What they did was they studied people watching horror films and saw how many calories were burned as they watched a film. So for example, The Shining, they watched that film. This was the number one. You burn 184 calories watching The Shining. Another film, Jaws, Steven Spielberg's summer blockbuster Jaws. You watch that, you'll burn about 161 calories. On this list, it was mostly older classic horror films, as you can see, but even the recent film like Paranormal Activity, you watch that, you'll still burn a solid 111 calories. So what this does is, again, this isn't a huge benefit per se, but it is something that you're watching a horror film, you're enjoying it, this is something you're going to do anyway, you're going to burn off some of the calories from the snacks you brought into the movie theater with you. Secondly, let's move on to the positive psychological effects that watching a horror movie can have on you. Firstly, it should be understood that one of the primary reasons people watch horror films is to be scared, is they want to be made afraid. And this is because fear is a very powerful emotion. Stephen King said in one of his books that terror is the finest emotion, and so I will try to terrorize people. So this is something that another man by the name of Stuart Fishoff, this man was the professor of psychology at California State University, Los Angeles. He's also the senior editor of the online journal of media psychology. He was quoted saying this: "Horror films have a pre-registered audience just waiting for the latest Hollywood bouquet of blood, sweat, tears, and chills to exquisitely fill our lust for horribly sweet sensations." So what he's getting at is that people want to be scared, they want to have these emotions, they want to go through this ordeal when they watch a horror film. So if that's true, if that's the case, let's discuss some of the things that happen when people seek this out. Fear is an intense emotion that's often sought out, and horror movies are the perfect way to experience the emotion of fear. The reason being is because it's from a safe place. If you want to experience fear, many of the ways you can do that would put you in harm's way, would put you in danger. Of course, if you're watching a horror film, regardless of how intense those emotions are, you know that 90 minutes, 2 hours later, you can walk out and you're going to be perfectly fine. So if you're wanting to experience this intense emotion, a horror film is the perfect avenue from which to do that. Horror films, in a similar way, they also give you a palpable sense of excitement or exhilaration. That same professor, Fishoff, he was quoted saying, "If we have a relatively calm, uneventful lifestyle, we seek out something that's going to be exciting for us because our nervous system requires periodic revving, just like a muscular engine." So what he's saying is if we're operating along the same kind of pathways throughout our lives, we're always in the kind of same mode, moving at the same pace, at the same speed, at work, at home, at school, at whatever our daily routine is, every once in a while we're going to seek out something that's going to kind of spike our emotions or our feelings. So, again, horror films are the perfect avenue for that in a safe way that kind of works out some of the gears. As Fishoff is saying, this is not only a possibly beneficial way, but it's something that's actually encouraged, that it would be better for you to experience these heightened emotions rather than being in the same kind of emotional rut, feeling similar things 100% of the time. interestingly, the more intense or devastating a film is, often the more positive the audience reaction is. What this is saying is that the reason being that there's kind of a cathartic relief after the film is over. So if you're seeing this violence, this bloodshed, this horror, you're terrified, you're going through this whole ordeal, after the film is over, there's this big collective sigh, this you can finally take a breath, and you have this release. And that release is something that people enjoy. They enjoy getting out of a film, having been on this ride, experience all these emotions, and then having this long exhale. And that's more pronounced, more profound, the more horrific the film was that they experienced. Another thing that may not come to mind immediately when talking about horror films is that one of the things that keep people going to horror films is the sense of morality that they get from the films. Again, that's kind of surprising given the amount of bloodshed, sex, and other debaucheries that are present in most horror films. You wouldn't think that morality is something that would draw people in. But if you think about it, this is something that people go to because it's a very simple, basic way of seeing someone do something wrong and get punished for it. You see characters in the film doing something immoral, and they're going to meet some kind of an end to that action. Often it's horrific and violent and more over the top or dramatic than in the real world, but you see a very clear A to B. Someone does something wrong, they reap the consequences of that. This is something that was brought up in the Scream series, also Cabin in the Woods, these kind of parody horror films where the characters are aware of these horror tropes. They're aware that the characters will meet certain end or go through these certain ideals, and they comment on that, but still ultimately follow those same ideas that are common in most horror films. Finally, one of the other psychological impacts of horror films is that they can be very beneficial for young people. This may be why teenagers are often the ones that are most interested in watching horror films. The benefit of that is that a young person watching a horror film has to process the emotions that they're experiencing. So they go to a film, they're scared, they're frightened, they're terrified. At that moment, they have to make a choice. They either have to succumb to that fear, or they have to learn to cope with it. So it's something that's kind of a therapeutic process, where they're watching this film, they're experiencing these ideas, these images, whatever's being presented to them, and they have to make a choice. Is this going to something that kind of overpowers me, or am I going to be able to conquer my own emotions and keep them in check? So in that way, it's a healthy thing for a young person to go through that, because it makes them more in control of their emotions as they mature later in life. That being said, some of the positive and psychological, some of the physical and psychological positives about watching a horror film, I do kind of want to touch briefly on the other side of the argument. Some would still see watching horror films as a negative experience. One of the primary reasons would be some of the health reasons I talked about, the higher blood pressure and faster rate of breathing and things like that. Obviously that can burn calories, but that can also be a detriment if you already have adverse health conditions, things like that. There's also an article on Pajiba.com that talks about how horror films are thought to be problematic when they bring up traumatic memories for people. People remember something in their past that's brought up from these images, and it causes a negative experience. Neither of these arguments really hold much weight for me because they're too specific. They talk about people who have specific health conditions or specific pasts. So these should be, while they're valid concerns, shouldn't be taken as an indictment on horror films or entire genre or way of storytelling. In conclusion, as we've discussed the physical and psychological good that can come from watching horror films, I just want to kind of mention anybody who finds themselves interested in these types of entertainment to know that there's some benefit, there's some good that will come from that hobby that you have. For those of you who are not interested in that, I would recommend you take advantage of some of those positive side effects. Go ahead and pop The Shining or Nightmare on Elm Street on the Netflix queue. And I'm not just recommending this for entertainment purposes, but I'm doing it for your health. Once again, my name is Christian Estabrook. Thank you for listening. Have a good night.